Chosen one, you didn't come here by accident. You were summoned. If you've ever felt like you were born into the wrong place, the wrong time, or the wrong family, it's not because you don't belong. It's because you were sent to shift the atmosphere. You are not too sensitive, too deep, or too intense. You are a signal, a surge, a spark wrapped in skin. This space is for the ones who've been misunderstood since the beginning. The ones who asked too many questions, felt too much, and saw things others pretended not to. The ones told to calm down when they were really waking up. You've been told to shrink, blend, follow, but every cell in you was built to lead, break, and rebuild. You're not broken, you're bold. You're not lost, you're layered. And no, you're not imagining it. Your gift is real, your knowing is valid, and your time is now. You were never meant to fit in. You were born to reveal, reroute, and resurrect what others tried to bury. So welcome, not just to a message, but to a movement. You are not here to be accepted. You are here to activate. Let's begin. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. They never say it out loud, but from the moment you arrive, the atmosphere shifts, not with noise or rebellion, but with something much quieter and far more disturbing to them. There's an edge to your presence that unsettles those who've mastered the art of hiding. You don't cry for attention. You pull attention without trying. And it's not your words. They can dismiss those. It's the feeling that you came remembering something they forgot on purpose. Before you can form sentences, you interrupt the rhythm. Not through tantrums, but through perception. Your awareness cuts through pretense like a blade through silk. It shows up in how you glance at someone and they stammer, in how you tilt your head when someone lies, in the way the air thickens when you enter a room where secrets sleep under the rug. And they feel it, the exposure, the unraveling, the reckoning wrapped in the body of a toddler. Homes that rely on pretending don't welcome precision. And your gift isn't polite. It doesn't smile when it senses deception. It doesn't nod to keep the peace. It doesn't care about tradition, hierarchy, or age. That's what shakes them. You're not disruptive because you misbehave. You're disruptive because you refuse to absorb the script. They whisper about you, not because you're broken, but because you never broke. So they try to tone it down, laugh it off, rename it. But underneath every label is a quiet desperation, a hope that somehow your intuition will fade. Because if it doesn't, the illusions they depend on won't last much longer. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. It's not your volume that haunts them. It's your stillness. They breathe easier when you cry, but grow uneasy when you simply look. Not a tantrum, not a scream, just watching, absorbing, holding space with eyes that seem borrowed from something ancient. You sit in corners, like a question no one wants to answer, and they feel seen in ways that make them sweat. You don't need to speak to disturb the room. The silence you carry carries weight. You don't listen to what's said. You tune in to what's meant. And that bypasses every mask they've practiced wearing. It's not fair to them, they say, how you read people without a handbook, how your expressions react before you know the meaning of what was said. But deep down, they know this isn't about fairness. It's about exposure. You trigger the things they buried, not with judgment, but with presence. They flinch not because you accuse them, but because your being alone makes them remember. You don't match their version of a child. You're not naive, bubbly, or overly amused. You carry the frequency of recognition, and recognition is unsettling for those who've made peace with forgetting. They try to convince themselves it's imagination, But it's not your mind they're trying to silence. It's their own discomfort. You reveal it just by being, by sensing what no one teaches. And that is precisely why you were never meant to be ignored. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They say it's for your good, that it's love, care, tradition. But under the surface, it's something else entirely, an invisible script written without your consent. It doesn't involve cloaks or candles. It unfolds in the quiet, familiar places. In the name of safety, your essence is altered. In the name of culture, your instincts are dimmed. They speak protection, but act prevention. The moment your presence starts to ripple through their carefully held patterns, they look for ways to contain what they can't understand. They bring you to ceremonies disguised as blessings, but underneath the surface, they are agreements, energetic contracts that say, not now, or worse, never. These aren't fueled by malice, but by panic. Your arrival triggered waves they weren't ready to surf. So instead of learning how to swim, they build walls. You're rinsed in symbols and wrapped in silence. They call it cleansing. But what they're really doing is rewriting your frequency to fit their comfort zone. This containment doesn't scream. It whispers. It nudges you away from trust in your own voice. It drapes your knowing in confusion, guilt, or fatigue. And years pass before you realize that the parts of you that feel off may be echoes of that moment. Not because you are flawed, but because you were rerouted. Not by force, but by fear, dressed as love. But all spells weaken. All fog lifts. One day, what you thought was broken begins to stir. You remember feelings you couldn't explain. You begin sensing again. The binding was never final, just dormant. And now, the signal reactivates, not to punish the past, but to reclaim what was paused. Because what was buried wasn't erased, it waited. They never say, "We're afraid of what you see." They simply frame your honesty as the issue, not because you lash out or cause chaos, but because your clarity disturbs the structures they depend on. You walk in, and without effort, dissolve performance. Not with rebellion, but with presence. That alone makes you impossible to manage. You don't match their mold. Where others accept surface, you pierce into substance. You listen with your whole body, not your ears. And it unsettles people who've built their lives on partial truths. You react to tension long before it turns into conflict. You question things others have learned to ignore. It isn't rebellion, it's recognition. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. Because they can't cover themselves in your company, they find comfort in calling you difficult. But it's never about your volume, it's about your perception. You feel things they'd rather suppress. And instead of rising to meet you, they shrink you to fit their limitations. Tone it down. Don't make it awkward. Just go with the flow. Not for your benefit, but to protect the fragile roles they play. You weren't disruptive. You were accurate. And that accuracy made them nervous. They didn't want to explore why your energy made them shift in their seat. They just wanted the shifting to stop. So they made you believe your awareness was a flaw. But what they avoided is now returning. Because what you see cannot be unseen. And who you are cannot be flattened to make others feel whole. From the first breath, the atmosphere isn't just altered, it's disrupted. The disturbance doesn't start with your actions, but with your existence. You enter not as an echo of what was, but as a signal of what must end. The lineage you arrive through doesn't just carry history. It carries unresolved weight, burdens left unnamed, choices made in panic, shadows passed down like heirlooms, never spoken of, but deeply felt. And somehow, without memory or language, you ignite them all. It's not illness or misfortune that greets you. It's the backlash of inherited silence. Before you learn to form full thoughts, the very air begins to shift. Odd interruptions, unexplained fears, strange dreams, all surfacing like alarms in a system used to sleep. Not because you did something wrong, but because what you carry refuses to let what's hidden stay buried. The resistance you face is not random, it's generational. You're not up against people. You're confronting the consequences of what they never dared confront. Some of what you battle isn't external. It's the weight of agreements made in the dark, long before you ever arrived. Deals struck in desperation, promises sealed in fear. The kind of covenants that require compliance and silence to survive. But you don't come wired for silence. Your spirit doesn't recognize those terms. You arrive as interruption, not because you're disobedient, but because you're the one sent to break what others maintained. And so, the conflict begins early. The fight isn't about your personality, it's about what your light interrupts. You're not born to follow paths, you're born to uproot them. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They recognize it before you do, not with applause, but with tension. There's something about your arrival that doesn't feel cute. It feels charged. The kind of presence that doesn't fit easily into the patterns they've preserved. While others smile and coo, some elders pause, not out of joy, but out of unease. Because your presence doesn't reinforce their order, it questions it. What they sense isn't immaturity, it's power. You carry energy that doesn't blend. It shakes, and shaking is not what gatekeepers want. Their role isn't always to guide. Sometimes it's to keep things in place. And when something enters that might unravel their structure, the instinct isn't nurture, it's management. They suggest restraint, discipline, or early correction. Not because you're misbehaving, but because they see what you'll become and what you'll disrupt. Some wrap this control in concern. Others stay silent, watching, waiting, hoping the weight you carry dulls with time. But there's no dulling what was meant to wake generations. Even those who see your gift sometimes step back, not because they don't believe in you, but because supporting you would require opposing everything they've submitted to for decades. The misunderstanding you experience isn't accidental. It's structured. It's calculated. You aren't just stepping into time, you're bending it, rearranging it, causing what was once accepted to feel unsettled. And for those married to routine, you don't feel like hope, you feel like disruption. That's not your failure, it's your function. Some lives start with more than a cry. They begin with conflict. But it's not always visible. What shows up as medical issues, meltdowns, or emotional volatility is often something deeper in disguise. Not every scratch, symptom, or silence is biological. There's a different kind of struggle happening just beneath the skin. What looks like misbehavior is often the ripple effect of a clash between realms, where the physical body carries the burden of what the spirit is resisting. You weren't born into ease. Your very arrival triggered reactions, not just in people, but in patterns. Cycles, long untouched, stirred the moment you appeared. There's a reason your earliest years felt like chaos disguised as childhood. These weren't random disturbances, they were interference, because what they couldn't mute spiritually, they tried to suppress physically. When they couldn't reach your essence, they attacked the connection, your body, your peace, your rhythm. Your sleepless nights, your exhaustion, your wild emotions weren't signs of failure, they were signs of engagement. You were pulled into battles before language existed to explain them. Not because you were flawed, but because you were seen as a threat to systems that survived on silence. What others saw as tantrums were echoes of battles your soul was already fighting. And the aftermath left behind in your body, aches, shifts, fatigue, was evidence that your vessel had already been tested. You weren't reacting. You were responding to pressure that had no words yet. And now, looking back, you realize those early storms weren't just about growing up. They were signals of what you carried and how early the resistance began. You never made it up. You remembered what others forgot. You didn't invent it, you sensed it. Long before the world could explain your knowing, it tried to discredit it. You saw through masks and picked up what lingered behind smiles. You weren't guessing. You were tuning in to layers others trained themselves to block out. But because your awareness was inconvenient, it got rebranded as fantasy. When you spoke of the unseen, or the not yet, they didn't correct you out of care. They dismissed you to keep the comfort of denial. To admit you were accurate meant everything hidden had to be acknowledged. So instead, they labeled you dramatic, imaginative, odd. Not to protect you, but to protect themselves from what your clarity uncovered. It was never about your imagination. It was about their avoidance. You weren't coloring outside the lines. You were drawing truth no one wanted to look at. And rather than admit their discomfort, they chose to question your vision. Over time, those dismissals weren't harmless. They were conditioning. You began to hesitate. You kept silent. You tucked away what you saw to stay safe. But the gift didn't vanish. It waited. Because the world didn't need you quiet. It needed you clear. And now, what you silenced begins to speak again. Not for attention, but for alignment. The visions, the senses, the knowing. It was never imagination. It was insight in a world that wasn't ready for the mirror you held. You weren't sent to dazzle. Your presence isn't for decoration. The power you carry isn't meant to draw applause. It's meant to unravel what's false. You didn't come with a script or the intention to perform. You arrived to uncover. That alone unsettles people who depend on masks to function. They mistake your presence for disruption when all you do is reflect what's already there. You don't need an audience. You carry impact in your stillness. You don't raise your voice, you raise awareness. What you carry doesn't comfort, it clarifies. You don't soften what's distorted, you expose it by simply existing within it. That exposure makes people uneasy. You walk into a room and something shifts. Not because you're loud, but because the truth in you makes hiding harder. You're not the problem. They just don't know what to do with someone who can't be fooled. They feel revealed without being confronted. Your gaze, your instincts, your silence, they cut through pretense like thread. It's not attitude they react to, it's accuracy. And in a culture obsessed with appearance over alignment, that accuracy feels like rebellion. You're mislabeled not because you lack grace, but because you don't fake harmony. You weren't made to blend in. You were designed to call out the difference between what's real and what's rehearsed. You're not here to win favor. You're here to shift frequencies, and in doing so, you become both the revealer and the resistance, not by choice, but by nature. You don't just walk into a space, you awaken something in it. There's a pulse that follows you, not heard, but deeply felt. Your presence stirs timelines, interrupts patterns, and presses on places others have ignored for decades. Without knowing, you carry momentum that makes denial crumble. You are the beginning of endings, and that unsettles those who have lived comfortably in delay. Your presence doesn't ask for attention, but it demands recognition. People feel urgency rise in their chest when you're near, not because you accuse, but because your energy reminds them of everything they've avoided. You don't need to explain it, you simply are, and that being feels like a countdown to everything unresolved. You hold no malice, but still, they flinch. Because you don't threaten their safety, you threaten their stagnation. You bring acceleration to lives used to postponing, and that makes you feel dangerous to those who rely on delay to survive. They expected correction to come from outside, far away, in some future moment. Instead, it showed up quietly, wrapped in the form of a child who sees too much and says too little. You are the ending they didn't schedule, the reminder they hoped wouldn't arrive. Not because you bring fear, but because you cancel excuses. You carry a clarity that says, time isn't waiting. And when you show up, so does accountability. Not by preaching, but by existing as proof that the clock has moved forward. They look at you and hear, without a sound, this is your last chance to shift. That's not because you threaten their peace. It's because you represent the cost of postponing it. They never expected your brilliance to last. Their hope wasn't that you'd evolve into your fullness, it was that time would wear it down. From the beginning, their goal wasn't to cultivate, but to contain. Not through loud commands, but through subtle redirection. Their strategy was social polish, gentle corrections, quiet discouragements, masked as manners or maturity. That's too much. You'll understand when you're older. Don't say that here. It wasn't about love. It was about comfort. Theirs, not yours. They didn't try to destroy your gift. They tried to mute it until it forgot how to speak. They praised you when you performed, not when you perceived. You weren't encouraged to trust your knowing, only your ability to adapt. Intuition was labeled a phase, sensitivity a flaw, and clarity a coincidence. Also, you'd start doubting your edge and trading it for applause. But the truth couldn't be erased, only buried. And while they hoped time would dilute you, something within you kept recording. Every time you were told to dim, a part of you wrote it down. Not out of rebellion, but because it knew one day you'd need to remember. Now that day comes. Quietly, steadily, the remembering begins. The parts you thought outgrew themselves weren't lost. They were dormant. And now they stretch. Not into something new, but into what was always true. You were never meant to fade into acceptable. You were built to rise into what never fit the mold. Their comfort is not your calling. Their calm is not your clarity. And their version of who you should have been cannot contain who you're becoming. Something in you was paused, not ended. And you feel it now, the unraveling of everything that once silenced the core. For years, you lived like a guest in your own awareness, going through roles, routines, and rehearsed emotions, never quite feeling like you belonged in any of it. You called it growing up, but deep down, something always felt distant, like walking a road with no echo. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was suppression. Rituals don't always wear robes. Sometimes they wear expectations. You were shaped into someone palatable, polished, prepared to be liked more than to be real. You didn't stop being gifted. You stopped being in touch. That break didn't mean failure. It meant containment. The version of you that learned how to fit wasn't false, but it was edited. And now the edits undo themselves. The old code glitches. You find yourself feeling things you can't explain, remembering things no one taught you. Emotions rise from nowhere. Dreams return with symbols too vivid to ignore. It feels like chaos, but it's recovery. Your system is defrosting. The fog lifts not into clarity, but into confrontation. You aren't collapsing, you're resurfacing. And with each shift, the self you were told to abandon steps forward. The one who knew without proof. The one who didn't ask permission to feel deeply, see clearly, and speak honestly. That version of you isn't gone. It's been waiting, watching, until you had the strength to reclaim what they tried to rename as too much. Now, nothing about you is too much. It's exactly on time. You are not the result of a disconnected lineage. You are the interruption of a long-standing silence. The blood you carry does not come from emptiness. It carries echoes of voices that once moved mountains in spirit. It holds remnants of strength that was never lost, just locked away. Somewhere along the line, the ones before you chose stillness over confrontation. Not because they were weak, but because the cost of power became too high in a world demanding them to shrink. They did not forget how to listen to the invisible or speak into realms beyond logic. They simply learned to do it behind closed doors. Their knowledge never vanished. It was just buried under decades of fitting in. The rituals they kept became hollow, not removed, just stripped of intention. Outwardly, the motions remained. Inwardly, the fire dimmed. Out of fear of being labeled, misunderstood, or cast out, they chose to mask their brilliance in routine. And then you arrived, uncoded, untrained, but not uninformed. Something in you refuses to sit quietly inside a story you didn't choose. You inherit not just memories, but assignments. You carry the weight of callings left unanswered. You are not here to rebel against tradition, but to reignite it. Fully, truthfully, powerfully. That makes you a disruption to everything built on false peace. You stir what was meant to stay dormant. You raise what was buried not because you're reckless, but because your spirit remembers what others learned to suppress. They call you different, but what you are is aligned. You didn't come to protect the appearance. They did. You came to complete what was paused. You are not the outlier. You are the reclaimer. You do not undo the bloodline. You restore its voice, not by recreating what once was, but by embodying what it was always meant to become.